That's getting very technical for me. But then you'd say, based on yesterday's election, where are those convertible 10%? Where are they sitting on the scale?
The ideological ones are very ideological, right? They'd be extreme left or extreme right or center left. But here's the secret about pure independence is that what makes them pure independent is that they have a sense of civic duty about voting, but they don't like politics. They don't pay attention much to politics. I mean, there's going to be some exceptions to that. Someone who's really well-read and engaged, but predominantly, and you can see this in focus group research, especially Rich Thau's excellent stuff from 2020, they don't know jack shit about politics and they're completely imagistic. So like in my research, I argue the pure independent vote can predictably be guessed or estimated to break against the party in power in these competitive elections. And I'm guessing like if I had a big data set and I could break it down, shift them out of that bigger pot of independence, they probably broke for Youngkin, maybe 60-40.
Right. So such a small margin there. Cheri, what's your response to that? Or any thoughts on that?
Well, look, when I first started working on the Hill in the mid-'80s, it was pretty accepted that the most Americans are in the messy middle. Like 80% were slightly right of center, slightly left of center, but centrist. And then came along conservative talk radio and then later Fox News. And that helped pull people to that fringe, and the left would respond in kind. And so I think you have more people who, in terms of the propaganda they ingest and what works on them, pulls them to those fringes. That said, when you have lower information voters, people who are not that engaged or who are not highly educated, these are the ones that don't pay attention. As Rachel just said, they aren't really watching politics. They don't care. They say they don't like it. They can be the most vulnerable to some of this messaging that we saw regarding CRT. They don't know that someone's just, mind effed them into something that's very racist. They don't consider themselves to be racist. So you've got the sophisticated racists that worked on these people and stoked the fear. And so they voted their fears, not because they are just born and bred racist and they've been racist all their life. They don't think of themselves that way. I mean, my God, they voted for a black lieutenant governor. So they think we're cool on this. So they don't know that someone just messed with their minds. And that's something that media now that's becoming so diverse and people are consuming all kinds of media. But there is a certain part of the electorate that, last year when I was doing America Reads the Mueller report, we were kind of going after those voters. Maybe we're a little bit older. They weren't online. They weren't on Twitter. They watch only Fox News. They only were told by Bill Barr that Mueller exonerated Trump. And so they believed it, not because, by God, we're going to support him no matter what. They just hadn't received the other information, the accurate information. And so we were reaching them with local TV because they do watch local TV. They were older, they're not on Twitter. They might be on Facebook. We went through this. We were bracketing, early morning farm reports and news and football and Wendy Williams and, the daytime talk shows to reach those women in that demographic that we were just discussing a minute ago. And that's when you play in the margins. And you can't beat them over the head with negative advertising either. That works on the base. That gets people to open their wallets and say, yeah, we got to fight. Well, that doesn't work on this group of people. And so in terms of people being in the center, I think most people consider themselves, or probably in most ways, are sort of centrist.
Right.
But they
are they left of center or right of center?
To the extremes.
I think last night told us they were a little bit more right than we realized. And in my opinion, is that generally speaking, America might be a little more right than we realize.
Possibly, but I think because of Trumpism, if he was actually held accountable and people would really be reviewing all the crimes, most people can't even keep track of everything that he should be investigated for in the crimes.
Right.
Most people forget the crimes that Bannon committed and that he was pardoned by Trump. Most of the Bannon fans don't even really know that. So I think if you start focusing on the crimes and the personalities involved, once these people see these personalities and change on those personalities, they start feeling differently, and then they might be more willing to listen to Democrats on some things. They might be looking at Nancy Pelosi, who today is saying she's putting family leave back into the play here. And that might work on some of these, high school educated white women voters. So you might have to slice and dice like that and build these coalitions. I don't think it's done because those voters didn't yesterday say, I am a right-wing Republican and this is how I'm going to vote, as Rachel just explained. You start messing with their minds and pulling them.
So let me give you $100 million, Rachel, and say you've got this money. What would you do to spend it into next?
Wait, where's mine?
You'll get yours in a bit. I want to see how Rachel spends it first, and then we'll come back to yours.
Yeah, no, I mean,
or you can spend it together if you want. But there's $100 million.
That's borderline actually like what I need to do what I want to do. Right.
Okay, here we are. Here we are fundraising.
The autopsy that needs to happen on the left doesn't involve polling voters anymore, right? I mean, what we need to do is we need to open up the books and look and see what are these people doing in terms of their electioneering system from top to bottom. You know, how are these resources getting allocated? What kind of campaigns are they running? What kind of ad buys are they doing? How much is going here, there, and everywhere? What type of messaging are they using? Why are they running these direct mail, honestly, like dialed in recycled messaging from 1980? Like, how much is going to survey research? Right. Why is so much going to survey research? Why is the party so convinced that they need polls to measure competition when the polls constantly let them down? When I could have told them without any I told them exactly which of these House delegates races, and this is all on record. I mean, it's not in the public record because these were private conversations, but these people know who they are, and they all know I pointed exactly to the right districts and told them exactly how they would all get lost and exactly why they would all lose them. So, like, why are we wasting all this money? And then I would take that $100 million and I would build a system like SpaceX. I mean, NASA and SpaceX both go to space, but as we all know, SpaceX is going there in a far more efficient, less bureaucratic manner. And the fact of is, it's not Jamie Harrison's fault that Virginia got lost. He runs a bureaucracy. You can keep chugging talent into the DNC. I don't give a shit if it's Stacey Abrams or Jesus himself, okay? At the end of the day, the DNC's problem is bureaucracy and this consulting class that has this financial incentive not to change. And ultimately, until we rip it apart and figure out how do we design a system that is conducive to hyperpolarization and to the modern electorate, understands which voters are moving in which way and how to tap into that, and is geared towards branding and not this like dichotomy between mobilization and persuasion. And should we talk about defund the police? Well, no, dude, you shouldn't. But you should also probably let the country know that the other party just tried to have a coup and is intent on dismantling democracy, right?
Good to know.
So that's what I would do. And then, you know, what I would do is I would build a wall in the critical places. So, Florida's a winnable race if we go after the Cuban vote. We cannot win statewide in Florida, period. I don't care if it's Val Demings, again, or Jesus himself, unless we figure out how to get the city of Miami up into the 80s on Democratic vote share, because right now it's popping in the 60s, and you're never going to win unless you can figure that out. That's a generational divide opening. You have to have hot candidates and those CDs down there running and picking off young Cuban voters. And if you don't have a campaign that's focused extensively building Latino infrastructure that is incorporated from day one and running year round, like the GOP is doing right now and has been doing for 3 years while we're sitting here sleeping, then we're screwed. So that's what I'd be using my $100 million to do.
You know, Richard Ojeda, I don't know if you know the guy, he's from West Virginia, but his point is, why are we spending $250 million fighting, Mitch McConnell in Kentucky, where he's backing all these they're good candidates in swingy districts around the country that he thinks are winnable, but he's getting no support from the DNC itself. He's running his own pack and he's got his own world out there. And it seems to me like that's a pretty good argument, especially if you've got another 40 seats that are now going to be on the bubble, in addition to the ones that already have been on the bubble. Why aren't we diving into those districts and making those districts more winnable? We seem to be giving those up.
Yeah, I mean, we need infrastructure investment, but at the end of the day, as long as we're sending our candidates out, either to do the embarrassed Democrat, I'm a fiscal conservative two-step shuffle, or, and not attack. I mean, honestly, the other party is going to run a disqualification campaign against any one of our candidates, and it doesn't matter how moderate or woke they are personally, right? It could be Jamie Harrison in South Carolina, who definitely did not run on defunding the police and installing socialism, but was branded that way anyway, right? So like ultimately we need people on the ticket who understand you have to lean into being a liberal. You have to lean into being a Democrat. You have to build that brand and redefine it in a positive frame. And while you're doing that, you have to disqualify the Republican Party, who, Cheri, cover your ears, has made it very easy for us to do your economic agenda that we could call, a GOP contract on America, not for America, that has decimated the American middle class, decimated our infrastructure, left us, a world leader in K through 12 as like the world's laughing stock, right? It should be easy to go out there and indict this party. And then that's not even getting to the part where it's basically the party of I'm with stupid, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, like, who wants to be on a party of crazy, stupid wingnuts?
Right now, I'm pretty familiar with the state of West Virginia. I went to college there. I own a little property there for a little over a decade. And I, in part, grew up just a few miles from the state line. West Virginia is different. And there's a reason why Manchin gets away with a lot of this. I would go in and just blanket West Virginia with radio, not slamming Manchin, but selling the key points of the Democratic agenda, and then maybe follow up and noting that Manchin wasn't doing it. Now, West Virginia is a poor state. It's not that sophisticated. You're not going to find as many people online as you would in other places. Radio works. In some places in West Virginia, you can't even get internet. You can't even get cell phone in the mountains plus other installations.
Richard Ojeda says the kids from school, they go to McDonald's to get the Wi-Fi so they can do their homework. That's how, but that tells you exactly how poor they are and how valuable broadband would be to them. But they don't even, they're not even thinking about that. But that's
but I would go there and so that people are aware of what Manchin is doing, because they're really not. I mean, that's talk about a state that votes against their interests. Mm-hmm. And the Manchin name is gold there. There was a James Manchin before that. I mean, it's just, you just vote for Manchin no matter what.
He's a Democrat, by the way. You know that. So
he's a Democrat, but he's a bad one.
I know.
He's a bad one.
But he's technically not calling.
To get away with it. Yeah, no, he's not. I mean, he's our biggest problem right now.
Manchin's my favorite kind of Democrat. He's the one that holds a seat.
Right.
Well, yeah. Exactly. But I would get rid of this consultant culture where they take care of their friends. It's not done on merit. They pocket a lot of money. It's largely male, and they take care of their buddies. And so when you have when you have an all-white male group sitting at a table making these decisions, we shouldn't be surprised when they get it wrong. And you go into a state like Virginia and, guess what? White women, your certain groups of white women go the opposite way. And as a woman who spent many years as a Republican operative amongst the white male Republican operatives, I know a little bit about this. And it was a challenge for Republicans. There were certain points of time Republicans could have done a little bit better than they did, but so you have to, I hate the word diversity, but it's just common sense. So if it's a group where they only throw in women here and there because they feel like they have to, if it's not really who you are, you're going to get it wrong. And that's the same with any group of people when you've got this like-minded people sitting around the table thinking they've got this and thinking they only have to say something once so that they don't have to drill down and reach people and take this. So I would take that $100 million, for the groups that Rachel was just talking about in Florida, the young Cubans. You find out where they get their information or where they potentially can get their information and go there. And, I don't think that that's happening enough. Just like, you see people showing ads on Twitter that aren't really being gone anywhere else. And I asked that question a lot of Lincoln Project. I saw early on, I had never seen news reports covering any kind of expenditure for a super PAC without saying where it's running and what's the buy. And so I saw early on that we had a problem here. And I had a feeling I was right about what was going on. And so, it's the consultant culture and people getting very rich and pocketing a lot of money that people are donating, thinking they're donating, say, in this case, to elect Democrats, to help Democrats, to build a Democratic House cushion, to gain seats in a year when they were supposed to gain seats, to build a cushion against the expected midterm losses. And instead, I think it was lost a net 10. And so when you're not saying how much the buy is, when you're showing the ads and no one is following up saying, Where is it running? How are you reaching persuadable voters? And also, when you're, at least in a campaign, I know Rachel said she doesn't like doing the surveys or whatever, but they're useful to know kind of messaging if something is going to work before you spend all that money on an ad. Are you just making yourself feel good? Is the base going to feel good because you're fighting back and you're tough? So, the big swig and dick club, they all love that. Excuse my French. But, that's what happens. Does that work on persuadable voters? No. Persuadable voters, sometimes you need a little bit of I don't want to say a softer touch, but you don't want to alienate them either. Now, those might not be the ads that win the Polly Awards.
But who cares? At least they win some votes.
That's, And
Rachel,
you have to have grown-ups at the table who understand that and understand that there's different steps to this before people just go, firing out of the box.
You both described that there's a consultant class, all these rich people who are doing things in these parties. How do you actually get rid of them?
Well, most people are afraid to call them out. I mean, you would be surprised the private messages I get for being so openly calling them out. But I've been dealing with this for a year. I mean, I remember as a Republican, Kellyanne Conway railing at certain meetings about the white male consultant kickback culture. And I don't know if it was because she wasn't part of it or that maybe she was running into it and was interfering with what she was trying to achieve because she was doing a lot of polling on, women's issues and whatnot. I think it's a big problem. And the only way you stop it is when the candidates who ultimately are the ones that decide to do the hiring or the party leaders, Chuck Schumer gave the Lincoln Project money. I mean, instead of Democrats doing it. So I do know a lot of Democratic consultants that were frustrated that the money was being hoovered up by this group that was getting so much press. And so how do you find the talent out there? Look at track.
It's more about how do you get rid of them? How do you get rid of the other people that are there? Rachel, do you have any thoughts on that?
Here's the thing. We're really talking about two different worlds within these two parties. That's part of the problem for Democrats. I mean, not in this vein, but the fact is the electioneering world for Republican and Democratic parties is as different as their coalitions, their ideologies, their behaviors, their demographic makeups. So what Cheri is describing to some extent about the grifting culture is less a factor. Let me promise you there's many starving people on the left, okay? Right. But where the left is really, their big problem is the status quo, right? There's this model that worked for Bill Clinton in 1992 because the electorate's always in process. So when we talk about realignment and de-alignment and party sorting and all these coalitional changes, we should know nothing's static. I've been studying world history a lot as democracy is declining in the US and things are always moving, okay? Right. But in the 1990s, when we came out of Reaganomics, the Democratic Party was coming out of a period that's very much like the Republican Party right now, plagued by craziness through the 60s and 70s as social change erupted. You also had the Vietnam War, you had the SLA, the Weather Underground blowing shit up. I mean, it was crazy, right? And they ended up in the national woods for a while. Inflation, Reaganomics gets invented. Hey, we lower taxes, we'll fix inflation, and it worked, but it also caused all these other problems, right? So when we think about how things have changed, the Republican Party, Karl Rove especially, saw the potential for basically wedge issue politics. He took a concept invented in one of the early presidential elections, 88, I think, and said, look, let's make referendum politics, right? But let's make referendums not about people the way it was originally invented, and instead make it about issues. And they took gay marriage, and that worked, and the media system was evolving at the same time on the right. And these things combined for them to kind of innovate this thing that both fed and articulates well hyperpolarization and partisanship. The Democratic Party does not have an electioneering system designed for that electorate. It has a system for a lot of persuadable voters. When Cheri was at the peak of her time at the RNC, there was a bigger pool, as she noted, of those independents before those media effects radicalize them. And so the thing I'm fighting in the consultant class, I think, is this bias towards the status quo and this fear of trying something new. I would just say, though, it is clear that the modus operandus is not working.
Yeah, the FEC yesterday announced that foreign governments, foreign money will be able to be funding referendums going forward, which is astounding and ridiculous, but also,
Crazy.
terrifying, because didn't we just go through this in 2016?
Yeah.
FEC is still apparently majority controlled by Republicans on that board. So these kind of things are going to be more and more present. I mean, certainly you can see them running issue type campaigns or referendum campaigns based on LGBTQ and on other of these wedge issues that you describe. Is there enough money in the United States to even combat a global force of influencers that's pouring billions of dollars into America?
I know.
Tough one. Oh. But expecting that's what it was worth proposing.
That's frightening, actually, because all you need to do is find people who only care about money and don't really have an ideology, and they don't care about the country. I mean, we see this all the time, but now you're talking about massive amounts of money, amounts that most consultants can barely get their heads around, and some can't wait to get their hands on.
All the money in the world, really.
And, and that's what will happen. I mean, we saw a little bit of that with Paul Manafort. You see what happens when someone really doesn't give a shit about their country and what they're willing to do. And now he's out running around free. I just want to add this one thing. I think people think this sounds like hyperbole. And I think in the era of Trump, which we're still in, let's face it, and could be again, they think everything sounds so crazy and so out there and that it's tinfoil hat stuff until it happens. You've got Matt Gaetz and others out there talking about, okay, when Republicans win the House next year, we're going to make Donald Trump the Speaker of the House, because you don't have to be an elected member of Congress to be elected Speaker. You just need to get people say, oh, and then they'll impeach, Biden and Harris, and people, but they won't have the votes in the Senate. That's not the danger. The real danger is Trump will be second in line to the presidency. And you saw the violence at the insurrection. I mean, I think that this could happen. And I think that Biden and Harris's lives become in danger then, because that would be how Trump gets back into the White House. I'm saying it out loud. I'm kind of afraid to say this stuff on Twitter because I want them to ban me. But this is basically, you don't think that Steve Bannon wouldn't be, Flynn out there pumping this up? I mean, they built gallows on the Capitol grounds. They were going to kill Mike Pence that day. They were going to hang him. They were going to try to kill Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Grassley. This is the secession. The entire line of secession, Pompeo would be next in line. He was conveniently out of the country. There was a big plan in place there. And if anybody thinks that this just sounds like pie in the sky, tinfoil hat crap, well, I got news for you. Just look at what they've done so far. And if that puts Trump in a position where he probably would have to be put back on Twitter, or he'd have the microphone again anyway, he would do it. People say, well, he would hate to do the job of Speaker. Well, he's not going to do the job of Speaker. He'll farm that out like he didn't like being president. He didn't do the job. So I think there's a real danger that in fact could happen. And you say, you're going to have these sane Republicans that'll get in his way. No, they won't. They'll do it. They'll do what they're told.
And Cheri, I plan on closing October with those ads, like the ads that show people him getting sworn in with that gavel and what it would mean to them.
And put those gallows out. Yeah. I mean,
Hell yeah,
good.
Dude.
That's exactly what people need. They need to be able to visualize.
Waking up in Virginia now, like terrified, right? What if we had painted a reality of a Republican governor in these crazy times for those Virginia voters before they had to wake up in that reality? Maybe they would have behaved differently.
I like what you're saying. This is exactly what needs to happen for next year.
Yeah, the ad that Rachel's talking about, by the way, that would instill fear, but fear on something that really could happen. The fear that was instilled in Virginia voters, in the lesser educated white women voters of Virginia yesterday, was based on something false. It wasn't real. Showing what Trump could do and what his allies in the House would do. Who would stand up to him? Has there ever been anybody who would stand up to say, no, we're not going to vote for him for Speaker? There isn't anybody who will do that. Look at all the times over the past 5-6 years, even during the primary, where we thought somebody would stand up to this monster, and they didn't, because he was ratings gold.
Kevin McCarthy, and they wanted. Are you listening to Cheri? Because you're never going to be Speaker, buddy. It's not happening.
He doesn't care.
He'll roll over and
he just wants the money.
I mean, this is a real fear, and it needs to be. And if that's what it takes to coalesce and find, I remember before I talked about having a few things that are easy to understand to define Trump and Trumpism, and therefore all Republicans buy, because there's so much out there. You have to zero in on some of it. That would be it. I can't wait for Rachel's ad.
You know what? I think this is so important.
Cheri, I can't wait till I have a big ass budget, because I'm going to send you on a rural America tour of
there you go.
What has 30 years of Republican voting done for you? Nothing.
Wait, to be fair, I worked for Bob Michael, who was very much a moderate, because I'm from Peoria. My dad always said, we're Bob Michael, Howard Baker Republicans. My dad is now glued to Fox News after, it's all changed. So if you go back to those types of Republicans and remind them that that's who they were and they can work with Democrats and that the party is no longer that, you have to remind them who they are, because they sound more like conservative Democrats at this point. People who could vote for Joe Biden, which is probably why Joe Biden got the Democratic nomination.
Got to disqualify them. Always disqualify.
It's not the party that when I started working on Capitol Hill in 1984, there were these kind of right-wing religious fringy people that were kind of weird, but they were and I thought, why are they around? They were kind of part of a coalition. This is something that slowly built. This was not the party then. It just, not the ones in Congress. I think there were pockets of people around Reagan that certainly helped him get elected, but working in Congress at the time, you just didn't see this.
But Youngkin is a nicer, friendlier version of Trump. For all intents and purposes, we don't know his policies yet, but I suspect they'll be more palatable in some ways. But overall, the GOP represents a retreat of democracy. We're falling into this fascism. I talk about my growing up in South Africa here a lot on the show, because I don't think people realize how awful it is growing up in fascism, how absolutely it permeates every aspect of your life. And you do not have freedom in everything, which means you have fear about everything, absolutely everything you do, no matter what it is, what your thoughts are, who you're with, what they're doing, what they're saying, who your friends are, what your neighbors are saying. It's absolutely terrifying, not to mention you're the pariah of the world. I mean, this is the kind of future that Americans are voting themselves into.
Well, some of us have already experienced that. You remember, I was hacked. I was catfished. I was hacked. And this is after I first, told the truth about Trump by merely publicly confirming an already published report. They had a super PAC when he and Lewandowski, this was 6 years ago, in October. And they lied. That the Washington Post did a report. They lied. They were going to sue the Post. And I came forward and said, Lewandowski told me all about it. I met with these guys, and to the point where I was like, why are they talking so openly about the super PAC? I was like, did the laws change? It was so weird. And so just by coming forward and confirming that the Washington Post report was correct, I was not the source for it, by the way, and I know who was now. That's when Trump ordered Ailes to ban me, and then later Jeff Zucker to ban me. This was power he had in a primary. That's, pretty chilling stuff. And then, like I said, then I was catfished. Somebody pretending that they were looking to hire me because some big Republican donors wanted to, make sure Trump didn't get the nomination. And that was just, they're doing that to get information to use against me, I guess, in the lawsuit. Should I prevail? And then I was hacked. My email was hacked. And
this is what democracy is going to look like.
This is what I experienced at a time when it just sounded crazy for me to talk about it.
Yeah.
And so it sounded so crazy. And now everybody realizes, oh, yeah, this is what Trump does. So, I do know what it feels like, and I was alone in it. So at least this way.
I know. You went through absolute hell there. Rachel, what's your dog's name again? I forget.
This is Hamilton.
Hamilton, of course. Hi, Hamilton. What does Hamilton think? Does he have any thoughts about how to win back everything? Oh
gosh, yes. Hammy said, send mommy $170 million.
I only had 100 million, but I'll give you 175 because you've been so great tonight. Rachel, tell everyone how they can find you on wherever you want them to find you, and how they can find your PAC, and maybe they'll send you some money.
Sure. So my Twitter handle is at Rachel Bitecofer. Please follow me also at Strike PAC. That's StrikePAC. Please follow that. Check through our ads that were in our launch packet. Basically, we're at startup mode here. Did some nice field testing in Virginia, but I wanted to build a blue wall. Couldn't build it. Help us build it for 22.
We sure need one. So everyone check out Rachel's Twitter feed and her PAC. And Cheri, we're so excited you're back. I'm so thrilled you're here and
Thanks.
on Narativ.
Yeah, I've taken a long break. I stopped doing my podcast and stopped doing a number of things. Something just ran by her. Another dog, I think.
He's still
Twitter handle is at Cheri Jacobus, CheriJacobus. I do have a website. I haven't updated it for a while, but it's CheriJacobus.com. So, and
awesome.
I'll hopefully have other things coming up soon that I can announce as soon as we get past it. Still dealing with the health challenges, but so far the doctors are like, yeah, we can't find cancer. So hopefully we keep it that way.
That is good news. I can't wait to have you guys back on the show. You're both terrific together, and hopefully we'll do it again because it's a really interesting insight, and you certainly sparked some interesting ideas for me, and I'm sure the audience will have you back hopefully in the near future on Narativ. Thank you both for being here tonight.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you guys.
Yeah, likewise. Have a good night. Bye. And thank you at home for watching. We'll see you again on Friday. Narativ is made possible by viewers like you. Join today and support truly independent journalism at patreon.com/Narativ. That's patreon.com/Narativ.